Everyone, welcome to the Bay Area Content Marketing Meetup, where we're now meeting about once a week here on Zoom. Today we have with us Hillary Weiss. Hillary is a creative director, messaging strategist, and coach. She's based in Brooklyn, New York, and she's going to tell us about an interesting new strategy on personal branding. Hillary, thanks so much for joining us, and take it away.
Thank you so much for having me, Dennis, and hello, everybody. As he said, I am Hillary. I live in Brooklyn, New York, and I'm so excited to be with you all today to be talking about this perspective on personal branding. So I'm going to get right into it right now. Let's take it away, folks. Where's my screen share button? Here it is. Okay. So start with the best personal brand strategy you're not using. So I'm really, first of all, excited Dennis was game to have me come and share this, because this is one of my favorite little hacks for really getting rolling with your personal branding and really starting to show up as yourself more online. And I know, as so many of us are bringing our businesses online, as so many of us are really probably, I'm not sure how many of you are, fully virtual now, or maybe you have, maybe you're in offices as well and working for companies. But in my corner of the internet, we are all exclusively online, and finding ways to cut through the noise with your branding, and not just with the look and feel of your brand, but also with the content and the conversations that you're having, all starts with nah. So let me get into how. So first, I will go ahead and introduce myself again for the third time, but just a little bit about me. This is, first of all, the homepage of my website. So if you go to hillaryweiss.com, you will see me jumping out of this computer, this lovely laptop here. But I'm a creative director, messaging strategist, and positioning coach. And just as a little background about what I do, I have been in the online business space for going on 10 years. And I actually got my start in this corner of the internet as a copywriter. And I got my start in the creative personal development women's space. And what the greatest joy about that corner of the internet is, as well, as it's very personality driven, because there's a lot of competition. I was working with a lot of life coaches, a lot of wellness coaches, a lot of people who were kind of in these crowded industries with a lot of people competing for attention, especially online. So helping to identify the big idea behind people's work is a huge driving force in what I do. My specialty is really taking all of the mess in people's brains, all of your opinions, your perspectives, your point of view, the way you do things, what you love and hate about your work and industry, take all of that and really spin it into goals and spin it into these really clear core concepts that make you totally unmissable in your market. And I find a lot of that starts with this idea of no. So I'll get into the backstory behind this now. So once upon a time, in my other life as a copywriter, how I started to build recognition was through my blog posts and through my content. Now, I was a copywriter for a number of years who didn't write for myself. And I think a lot of creative professionals run into this problem as well. Designers kind of hate to design for themselves. Copywriters hate to write for themselves. This stuff is difficult, y'all. And I found that what I was really enjoying and why I was struggling was because the traditional approach to creating content is look at your clients' pain points, figure out what the issue is, and then create content around that. And in the case of a copywriter, it's always the same advice. Okay, you should write a blog post about the 7 steps to optimize a sales page, because that's what everyone wants to know, right? But the reality was that topic and that kind of content was already so overdone. I didn't want to write these things and create these things because 1,000 people already smarter than me had already created them and done them. And so what kind of unlocked for me through the process of working to show up more for myself was when I started talking about different topics. When I started talking about my personal experience of entrepreneurship. When I started talking not about the way I did things necessarily, but the way I saw things, was that everything started to change. In fact, the most successful blog post I had from the start of this era was it's entitled Notes from an Unremarkable Child, how painful averageness equipped me with a life philosophy. And traditionally in the copywriter space, in the online business space, that is not a good driver of, business related content. But I realized that as I focused on, the nuance of the industry, the experience of entrepreneurship, the way I saw things, my own opinions. I started to gain not just notoriety, but more views and fans and people who were buying into me and my brand and the way I saw things, who became fiercely loyal because I was saying things and having conversations that they weren't seeing anywhere else. And so that sort of did its thing out there on the internet, which means a lot of people were coming to me asking, you know, how do you come up with these ideas? How do you approach coming up with, you know, defining your point of view and digging into your brain to figure out what you really think, as opposed to leaning on a, hope you can enjoy all of those nice city sirens, folks. But how do you look at things, people were asking me, that helps you develop this content? How do you come up with these original ideas? How do you avoid the templates, the 7 steps to optimize your sales page kind of approach to writing? And so I sat down and I was like, okay, so people want me to create a writing framework. Got it. Okay, so I did what everybody does when they have to create something, and especially a writing framework. I Googled how to create a writing framework. And what did I find? I found it was the same steps that were making the process of creating content so difficult for me. Same process. Think about your target. What are their pain points? How do you create content to solve it? So I was like, okay, no, absolutely not. I don't want to do this. I can't do this. How do I approach this? So I came up with what I call the statement piece framework, which is an approach to, again, really digging into your brain for your own original ideas and point of view. And this actually includes what I call the 3 statement piece scenarios. I've included a link to the statement piece framework here in the slide. I'm happy to drop it into the chat if you folks are curious to see what it's all about, but I'm about to walk you through it, so you can stay here as well. But the 3 statement piece scenarios are basically the sources of inspiration for where your own point of view, your precious, precious point of view, which makes you so valuable in the market. There are 3 ways you get that inspiration, and those are 3 modes of conversation. Often your best ideas and point of views, I find, are found in conversations you have with your clients, conversations you have with your colleagues, and the conversations that you have with yourself, where you are, you know, you're always going through the same thing in your head and you're like, this again, or man, I wish more people knew about this. And whatever that, you know, looks like for you. Oh, thank you, Dennis, for popping the link in the chat. I will be, the chat, I'm a big time get distracted by the chat person. So if you're dropping questions, I will check them at the end. Otherwise, I'll be, you know, going off on tangents this whole time. But, so there are the 3 statement piece scenarios. And the way I invited people to look at the scenarios were, you could either be anti or advocate. And for example, when you're in conversation with your clients, if you see an advocate sort of statement piece coming your way, an advocate idea, that's something a client says where you're like, oh my God, yes, absolutely. Let's talk about this more. I'm so glad you brought that up. I love this. I could geek out about this all day. That's an example of an advocate scenario. However, it's the anti that I realized was really getting people going. So an example of an anti-response sort of in that context would be, you know, in a conversation with a client says something to you or drops a really bad piece of advice you've heard a million times, and you think to yourself, God, if no one ever says that to me again, it would be way too soon. I'm really tired of this. I wish we had a way to just wipe this from the earth. Same story, same sort of story in the conversations that you have with your colleagues, where you're sitting across from someone back in the days when you could do that, you know, having a glass of wine, enjoying dinner with your colleagues. And you can there are conversation pieces and moments in the discussion where you're thinking, yes, absolutely, I'm so excited you brought this up. This is so cool, this recent industry innovation, or this, you know, this new offer someone's creating, or this new approach. But again, the more powerful response often comes from the anti-response, which is, oh geez, did you see that? Oh man, they're doing it again. I really wish, you know, things were different in the industry. And I wish that I really have so much to say about this. We often, and I'm discovering, you know, same story when in the conversations you have in your head, you're more coming to the conversations that are no based, things you're frustrated about, things that you don't want to see again, things that you're tired, like old tropes, old things people keep going back to that no longer work. You think about that much more often than you think about the innovations, the next steps, the next sort of zone in your industry or the next thing happening. And it's not to say that you don't think about those advocate things, but I found again and again, as people went through the framework, they were coming up and telling me almost with shame in their eyes that they were more anti than advocate. And this is almost universal. And I work in the women's space. So what's interesting about that is that women, of course, were kind of socialized to be more accommodating. So to feel that really powerful force of a no, or I disagree with this, or I don't want to see this anymore, was startling to them, but was such an amazing source of inspiration. So that's sort of where I came up with this idea for the starting with no branding. Okay, so let's talk about what this looks like in your personal branding. Now, I am a creative director for personal brands, and part of my offer is I do a 6-session deep dive with online business owners to really do the deep work to pull a really timeless and powerful brand out of them based on their personality, their point of view, their stories, their skill sets. As I said, all these pieces in your brain come together to develop a really amazing creative concept for your brand that translates into messaging, visuals, content strategy, all of these amazing pieces and all these must-haves if you want to be a brand online. And the first thing I start with a lot of my clients is, what are you tired of seeing in your industry? What do you want to be for or against? And so I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the nuance of what starting with no actually means. So hang on, my cursor cannot be found here. Give me one sec. Oh, no, wrong. Oh, sorry. I need to go back a slide. I cannot see my cursor for some reason, so give me 1 second. Let's turn this ship around. Okay. Anyway, so a few things to keep in mind. You'll see the glorious animations go on again. So starting with no in branding, and I will be showing you some examples of brands that started with no in just a moment. A few things to keep in mind. No doesn't have to be a negative. It can just be a line in the sand or a reason to disrupt. And this is, I suspect, why you see a lot of brands calling themselves like the Uber of such and such, because they started with the brand that removes a lot of the their approach to talking about their work in their branding is by removing the inconvenience, making things really simple, and really sort of taking all the extra legwork out of whatever it is that they're doing. So that's one sort of example of how a start with no brand looks in real time. So for example, if you are, a tech company who designs widgets and feel as though there is a lot of overcomplicated discussion about widgets out there, and there's a lot of jargon and nobody's speaking like a human being, that is a starting point for your brand. It means you're going to have a really specific kind of copy. It means you're going to have a really specific way to describe your products and to shoot them, you don't take photos of widgets, but to promote them. It means that the whole id and personality of their brand is going to be different than if they were doing it the way the rest of their industry does, which is kind of getting up their own butts, but perhaps about the jargon, and really confusing consumers by leaning on the power of their technology as opposed to speaking directly to the consumer. So that's one way to make it a line in the sand. Getting a more of a response to these questions with no doesn't make you a mean person. And I don't know if we're having any of these concerns in this group, but I do get this from my clients sometimes. They're like, when I think about what I don't want in my brand, like I'm so much more inspired than when I think about what I do want. What's up with that? And I find that what makes no such a powerful tool in figuring out what you want to be against as well as you want to be for, there's a much more narrow perspective, narrow series of choices when you think about what you don't want to be for versus what you do. Because when you think about branding from that, what do we want to be? How do we want to come across? You have a million options. You may want to, how you want to look, how you want to sound, how you want to feel. So when you think about it from the perspective of, okay, let's start with what do I not want to do and build from there, it clarifies and shrinks the number of possibilities for your brand and sort of helps you get focused. So figuring out what you don't want can lead to tremendous positives for you and your following. Because often I find if you're feeling against something or you're not a fan, chances are your target market is going to share that idea, and they've been waiting for somebody like you to come out and say that thing, to make that change that they know was needed, to speak to them like a human being in the widget, like by the widgets example. So it can be a huge positive for both yourself and the people that you work with. And then also I want to add that your no can change over time. Especially, I think for me, starting in the business, I was very no about some certain sales strategies and approaches to doing business online that I didn't fully understand. And so you got to give that no time to change. It's not necessarily sealed in blood. And that's also going to free you up to think about starting with no from this perspective, because it's not, again, signed in blood. Your opinions are allowed to change, but it is a starting point that has great power to hone in on your discernment and where your energy lies and how you most want to be perceived. So let's talk about a few no's to start with. And these are a fun one. These are fun ones. So first of all, what's a big industry trend no for you? And this was one example of this was I had once upon a time a copywriting client of mine who worked in the wellness space. And she had this website that was, very green smoothie, standing on the beach, hair blowing in the wind, and just very kind of standard health coach website, looking crunchy. And I met her, and she was totally unlike anything on her website. She was from Philly, was like swearing, it was a huge fan of the Beastie Boys, black leather jacket, and I was like, where is this coming from, first of all? Like, this is a bait and switch. We've got to talk about this. And so I asked her, what is it that you want to say? Like, what is it that you want to create with your brand? And she said, I want to tell people to burn all the effing diet books, throw them all in the garbage. We're finding our own approach to health. None of that's going to help. This billion-dollar industry is making so much money off of you and all of this. And so I said, we've got to center it. We've got to center the messaging around this. And she had this pushback because she was concerned. If I swear, people are going to think I'm not professional. If I tell them to burn the diet books, people maybe won't trust me or think that I'm judging them and all of this. But what it actually did was skyrocketed her business over the next year because she was having these less often had conversations, and people were flocking to her because she was going against the usual industry discussions. She was going against, what the wellness industry and health industry often banks on, which is everyone always going on another diet, and giving people another way to do things. So that was super powerful, and that's one example of an industry trend or a big no. A big branding no for you. This is another one when it comes to visuals. Like, what do you see on websites in your industry that you've seen a million billion times? Because switching up your visuals is a really powerful way to stand out. In my case, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, in my case in the online space, there's instance after instance of writers and creators and creative directors having pages that are, lots of white space and beautiful golds and pastels and, all of these like pink and blue and yellow colors. Because again, it's a women focused space. So for me, as you can tell, I was like, I don't want, if I never see another pastel or glittery gold on a website, it will be too soon, y'all. So I focused my color scheme on the 3 primary colors, red, yellow, and blue, as you can see from these slides. And it really helped me stand out and made me wildly memorable. And nobody else in my space is owning those colors. So that's another reason why starting with no is so powerful, because you can position yourself against what's already out there. And I also suggest that you interrogate the no, because you don't want to just be against something for the sake of it. You need to think, what can you create that is counter? If this is the effect, how can you create the opposite impact? How can you create the opposite effect and develop that trust that way? And then finally, how would you do it your way? Like, so there's an industry practice that you're really against, or a best practice that you know is outdated and doesn't work. Or there's branding you've seen over and over. I know in the SaaS space, it's a lot of blue and white and those little chubby looking cartoon guys for one reason or another. If you're a SaaS company, how are you going to create a counter to that makes you memorable, but also feels like your brand? So those are sort of some ways to start with no, and get those ideas flowing as you think about this next phase of your personal brand, whether you are starting a rebrand or whether you want to come at your content strategy in a different way. This is how to do it. So now I wanted to show you some examples of brands that started with no. Some of these brands I've worked with or been featured on. And some of them I haven't. I think there's one I haven't, but I'll remember shortly when I see the slide. So first of all, Susan Hyatt. So I didn't want to share the full websites on my screen because I know that can be distracting going in and out of the slides. So I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about Susan Hyatt. So she's not the client, the wellness client I just spoke about, but Susan Hyatt's whole brand is built around this idea of the BEAR methodology. And it's really about women's empowerment through the lens of letting go of diet culture. She's a coach, she's a master coach, and she also trains coaches in this methodology of helping women get back to health through self-love, self-care, and just really enjoying the hell out of life. And so her brand started with the no. She decided she wanted to be against a lot of the traditional approaches to wellness. And also she's against the tactic wellness often uses of creating problems in order to solve them in a way. So it's like, oh, you're 10 pounds overweight. That can't be healthy. Or you no longer fit into your skinny jeans. Isn't that shameful? And she refuses to buy into any of that. And if you check out her website, if you check her out anywhere on the internet, you can see that contrarian vibe. And because of this, she is, again, wildly impactful and incredibly successful with this methodology because she's serving a whole group of women who have been on and off diets their whole lives and nothing has worked, who have been taught deprivation, who have been taught that their body's not good enough and they should always be trying to fix it. And because she's coming at it from this no angle of all of that is nonsense, let's create something new. How about you love yourself into feeling great? And then the pounds, any weight loss, any more gym going is just a side effect because you're loving yourself more and creating this incredible approach to life that lets go of all that diet and deprivation and obsession. So that's one example of a no brand. And then a second no brand. So I am a co-host of a show on YouTube called Hillary and Margot Yell at Websites. It's HamYaw for short. That's HAMYAW. I wish I was kidding. But we've been doing it for a couple of years and she's my co-host. And part of the reason why I love Margot's brand is that while she works in marketing and while she's done consulting for many years, she kind of positions herself as the anti-marketer. And so if you know anything about web designer strategy, you know any strategist will tell you, you have to have a photo of yourself in your header to increase your conversion rates. And what I love about Margot is her no is just making fun at all of these rules of marketing and not to take it too seriously. And you can see in the headline here, they say if I have a photo here, it will increase my conversion rates. So what she's doing here is making a joke and not just making a really great joke, she's making a joke to the people who will get it, which is her target market. And the first time I saw this was before I met her and I laughed. I took screenshots, sent them to everybody I knew. So if anyone's not laughing as hard about this as me, I understand, but I am the target for this. Because again, she pokes fun at marketing. She never takes herself too seriously. And she also believes a lot of traditional internet marketing is kind of schmucky. And that is how she sort of comes at everything in her brand. So that's part of how she starts with no. Her website is thatseemsimportant.com. She's an amazing writer. Be sure to join her newsletter because she's phenomenal, as well as a dear friend. And then finally, we have, well, almost finally, because I'll talk about HamYaw in a second. But everybody hates marketers. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this podcast. I've been featured on it. There's a lot of really great folks who have been on it. It's run by this guy, Louis, who is a French, so everything starts with no in France. But he started this podcast with the no, with the fact he didn't want to create a traditional podcast, with the fact that a lot of traditional marketing podcasts can be really boring, or people just promoting themselves, or feeling like, they promoting themselves, or feeling like they're just like too big for their britches. And Louis is actually a really tough interviewer as well. Like, he will research you, he will go back into your personal history, and he will ask you really tough questions, which I love, and makes him an amazing podcast host and makes it very stressful to be a guest. But he started with that no. He was sick of those softball question interviews. He was tired of the same names being seen over and over. So he features a ton of different people from all over the web. And he comes at it with this title, Everybody Hates Marketers. Because, there's a pretty bad history with a lot of marketing. People don't always trust us. Seth Godin says all marketers are liars, cross it out, all marketers tell stories, but that All Marketers Are Liars still rings true. And it's also why that's a book title that starts with an O. But anyway, so that's one really great example, and I fully recommend checking this podcast out. And then finally, we have my YouTube channel, Ham Y'all. Just a little bit of background on this. We started this show because our no was that we didn't want to create a podcast. So we decided to create a YouTube show that people now call a podcast. So who knows if that was effective. But the whole point of the show was it's us talking and having really candid conversations about marketing topics that are not for beginners necessarily. Our show is really for, well, plenty of beginners watch it. Our show is for slightly more advanced folks who are ready to dig into the nuance, who want to talk about the emotional experience, want to talk about what works and what doesn't, and are at a point where they just want to feel like they're listening in to two friends talking, as opposed to necessarily being taught step-by-step skills, which is so much of what YouTube is used for in the marketing space. So we decided we want to do something a little different. We've been doing this for a couple of years, and I'm proud to say it is rather a cult hit in the marketing space at this point. While our numbers are modest, they are very enthusiastic. And it's just a real joy to put together as well, because often when you find you start with no, you open yourself up to an approach to branding, to content, to creation that feels way more fun and way more like you, because you're not following someone else's rules. You're saying no, putting your line in the sand, and making your own. And that brings us to the end of today's presentation. I can talk a lot, so I wanted to make sure I wasn't talking for too long here. So I would love to know if you guys have any questions. These are where you can find me online. HillaryWeiss.com is my website. hello@HillaryWeiss.com is my email. And I am on Instagram and Twitter at HCWeiss on both. And I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen anytime now.
That was great, Hillary.
Thank you so much, Dennis.
Yeah, so on the Everyone Hates Marketers, I'm going to look that up.
Yes.
And I noticed, obviously, the host is a marketer. So it reminds me, last night, I have a teen daughter, and she was on her phone, and I said, "What are you watching?" She said, "I'm watching an influencer on YouTube making fun of people who make videos."
Yes, see, starting with no is a lot. You create that really powerful connection, because it's like, boom, oh my God, somebody thinks the way I do. Whoa. Like, I thought I was so alone, because so much of our industries looks uniform, I think. And so when we start with no, and we're like, how do I break this cycle? Like, I guess the word for it in tech is more disruption. But I find starting with no, like, it's so much more fun. It creates so much more space for creativity and really reveals what you're passionate about, which is such a joy.
Yeah. Well, of course, my thought was he's making fun of people, but he's using video himself.
Yeah, exactly. The irony is not lost.
That's right.
But I think that, yeah, and it's very, you don't always want to be a critic for the sake of being a critic. But it is a great starting point for clearly the gentleman your daughter was watching, and also for all kinds of personal branding. Oh yeah, we got people leaving with smiles, wonderfully useful and engaging. Yay, thank you guys.
Yeah, you're getting lots of compliments. Someone who had to leave early sent me a private message saying he loves your sass.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Living in New York, you gotta have a little bit of that sass in your back pocket at any given time. And thank you all for listening and checking it out. I really appreciate it. Let me know if you guys have any questions.
Yeah, feel free to use the chat for questions, or you can unmute yourself if you want to ask it. I had a question, Hillary. So obviously, like a lot of the message was around starting with the no, and that can help you say what the yes ought to be. But do you have any tips on like figuring out the yes after you've determined the no?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's that's a great question. But I think the way to figure out the yes is asking yourself, like, okay, well, if this is a no, how would I do it my way? If I ruled the world, if I ruled the industry, how would I come at this? And often in your life and in your life experiences, you can draw from actually that information outside of yourself in order to sort of figure out what that is. So in my case, and often when you sort of pursue the no, you realize there is deeper meanings. Yes. Saying no is a way to be more authentic. Absolutely. So in my case, I mentioned the story of me using red, yellow, and blue as my brand colors in an industry full of pastels and whites and golds and silvers and blacks, I guess, if we're listing out colors. But when I was sitting with that approach, and I was sitting with like, okay, so I want to have an unlikely color palette that's red, yellow, and blue. Like, why? What is interesting about that to me? Like, why did I come up with that? And I realized that it was, you guys familiar with the artist Mondrian?
Yes.
Okay, so just, for anyone, the uninitiated, the L'Oreal bottle from the 90s with the red, yellow, and blue on it. And I always loved that bottle as a kid. And I was looking more into Mondrian's work once upon a time. And he's an abstract artist whose the red, yellow, and blue is because he distills everything down to its essence, which is all of these three primary colors. When you look deeply enough at something, it's the red, yellow, and blue. And that's a lot of what I do in my work, is that it distills my clients' vision, point of view, skill set into these core concepts that represent the big idea, that represent the brand. So that was a way to kind of find the deeper meaning by really digging into what I thought. But also, in order to, as you say, how to get from the no to the yes is, again, asking how do I do things and how would I do things differently? And also, why does this matter so much to me? Why do I feel such a strong aversion to this idea or this process or this approach? Is it just because I'm feeling mean that day? Like, is it just because I'm in my feelings and haven't had my second cup of coffee? I don't know. But when it is something that is meant to be a cornerstone of your brand, often you will find a deeper meaning under that self-inquiry and under that layer that's going to reveal, if you don't want to do it this way, how do you think it should be done? And how do you start to do that?
Got it. Makes sense. And I know you mentioned some of your services at the beginning, but maybe just to circle back for folks who might be interested or might have a friend or colleague who's interested, just tell us a little bit about your services.
Absolutely. So I have my creative direction, which is my core service. And this is a brand deep dive. And all respect to brand experts who will brand you in 24 hours or like one strategy call and you've got a website. This is a real deep dive into who you are as a person and as a professional and what your point of view is, what your no is, that really creates a brand that's built to stand the test of time. Because a lot of what happens in the online branding space is that like, all right, I'm rebranding my website, great. And you go to a designer and you get it done, you get some new photos, and then a year, 2 years later, you're like, this is feeling out of date. This doesn't feel like me anymore. I don't know about this. This is just very trendy at the time, and it's looking a little gauche now. Whereas this approach to branding creates a really strong, what I call the statement piece. My brand is Statement Piece Studio. Creates a really core, big idea, statement piece creative concept that runs through every touch point of your brand, from your website to your social presence, to your content, to your offers, even the way you interact with clients. And what that does is it gives you that foundation that can stand the test of time and trend, because it's based on who you really are and the way you see things, and on your no's as well as your yeses. So that's my creative direction offer. It is for personal brands in the online space, but I'm also open to working with other brands around this as well. But also I do messaging strategy, and messaging strategy is for business owners whose approach involves a fair amount of launching, or they're starting a rebrand and want to nail their messaging on their websites and in their nurture sequences and all of that. And my approach to messaging strategy, what that does is really dig into your brain to pull out all of those pieces that should be driving your messaging from a strategic standpoint. So what it does is we sit down and we dive deep into everything from the pain points of your target market, to the results and benefits of your offers, to the beliefs that need to shift in order to get people interested in you and what you're doing, to the yeses and nos for tone and how the messaging is supposed to work. And what you can do with this is hand it to any copywriter, any ad strategist, any consultant, so they can get a feel for exactly who you're talking to, how, and why. And it's the same story with creative direction. What the creative direction process does is give you an end-to-end, I call it your brand statement and style Bible, which is basically like end-to-end brand strategy and clear directives for your brand, so that you can hand it to the copywriter, to the designer, to the photographer, and they're going to know what you're all about and exactly what to do, which then protects your investment. And messaging strategy can either be just the strategy document, but I also offer outlines of marketing collaterals like emails and social shares, sales pages, all of that good stuff. And then I also do positioning coaching for creative business owners. And this is more for folks in the online space, copywriters, designers, consultants, coaches who've been really doing well in their business for the last, few years, 5 years, 10 years, but are ready to level up and kind of come out behind the curtain of client work. People who haven't really built brands for themselves yet, who are really interested in getting clear about exactly what they do so freaking well that makes them unforgettable, unmissable in their market, allows them to charge more, create content, all of that good stuff. So it's basically for creative service providers who want to be brands, who want to be the it girl or guy in their industry, and who want to sell courses, create content, start a podcast, create new packages, raise their prices, become an authority. And what we do in that process is really define your specialty. So really what niche you should be living in and where you want to be focusing your energy. And then your signature framework, which is your totally unique approach to the way you do things and why, because that's where everything comes from. Your content, the courses or workshops you want to run, like this one, the way you approach your branding and messaging, the way you approach your clients and how you sell yourself, because often when you have a signature framework, you can sell it on its own as strategy, but also use the framework itself to ramp up the value of your current packages and all of those lovely pieces. I'm in the middle of a launch for it right now, so if you're really curious, I'm about to do some Q&A for it on Instagram in a few minutes, but
yes.
That's what I do. Oh, we got someone on
that role that was left.
Oh, good. What do you think of it?
So that's my spiel.
Excellent. Those are some great services. So thanks again for joining us, Hillary. I'm just going to give a last call if anyone happens to have any questions. Give a few seconds. All right. Well, good luck with your Instagram. Is it a live Instagram live?
Yeah.
Excellent.
I don't love going live on Instagram, but away we go. All right. Thank you so much, Dennis. This was such a pleasure, and thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks for attending, and thanks again, Hillary.
Bye,
Take care.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Take care. Bye.